Today, we're going to talk about thread tension on sewing machines. At my shop, I routinely get calls from people who are having difficulty with their machines, and the conversation usually goes along the lines of, my machine is having tension problems, how much do you charge to fix that? And it's not something that is just necessarily tied to a tension device or the bobbin case. It has to do with how the machine is threaded. So I want to start off with a spool of thread and the way the machine delivers the thread to the needle. First thing is you want to make sure that the thread's coming off the spool freely. And when you put the spool on the spool pin, you want to make sure that any little catching device that's supposed to keep the thread from unraveling or coming off that spool is not in the equation. You want it to pull off there freely. Now, we head for the thread guides because the thread guide lines the thread up to properly go through the tension device. And one aspect of threading the machine that some people miss is that they thread the machine with the presser foot down. And when the machine is threaded with the presser foot down, the tension device closes and the thread is not really properly engaged or entered into the tension disc. So we put the presser foot up and we pull the thread into the tension device. And then we would have to hold the thread so that we can properly engage the check spring. The check spring, when it's properly engaged, is going to flex, and it's going to flex with authority. It's going to pull that thread back down, except when the thread pulls harder. Okay? After that, we head for the take-up lever, which is often referred to as the part of the thread guide that bobs up and down, because it does have a motion like that. And you see what's happening as I turn that, it's going down and it's pulling the thread up, and when it pulls the thread up, the check spring becomes engaged and moves. And then after that, we usually have anywhere from 2 to 4 more thread guides before we get to the needle. And as we're pulling the thread through the thread guides, we want to check on the way and make sure that we're getting a normal free thread flow. And when I'm pulling on that thread, the spool's turning very easily, very nicely. And then I lower the presser foot, and at that point, the only motion is coming from the check spring, because those tension discs have come together, clamped down on the thread so that we have proper tension, and the only thing that can move is a check spring. And bear in mind again that you're looking at a very old machine here where all these parts are out so they can be seen more easily than some of the newer machines. But all the newer machines have all these parts, and they are all threaded in that same fashion, and they all form the same function on every machine. And also, when your presser foot is down, you will get a little bit of flex on the needle, as opposed to not getting any when the presser foot is up. Now we know that machine is properly threaded because it's behaving like it should. Now, one of the common problems that I've seen, machines will come into me and they're having a tension problem. And when I look at the spool, it almost looks right, but it feels a little funny, and what's going on? The thread got wrapped around the spool pin somehow, or it got caught back in that little nook in the thread so it can't come free. So those are things that you always want to check, especially if your thread's breaking or your tension looks erratic. And I think that's primarily one of the primary problems that people have with thread tension is the proper threading of the machine. What I'd like to talk about after that is what happens below the presser foot or under the bed of the machine, and I also would like to talk about the bobbin tension. Now that we have threaded our machine properly and we can see that all of the parts of the machine are engaging the thread properly, we have half of our tension equation in place. And the second half of the tension equation is the bobbin thread. And bobbin thread needs to more or less pretty closely match the top tension. When you put your bobbin into your bobbin case, you want to make sure that you get it into the spring. You want to make sure that when it is in the bobbin case and you pull on the thread that you feel that there is some resistance so that the thread isn't flowing freely. Another thing that I see pretty regularly is that people put their bobbins in upside down. And the reason that the bobbin needs to be the other way is because the thread changes direction and it helps prevent backlash. When you get backlash and that bobbin turns fast, now the bobbin's going inside the bobbin, inside the hook back and forth, creating irregular tension. So make sure you get your bobbin installed properly. Get your bobbin installed properly, then, and you're pulling and you're feeling tension. It is possible under the tension spring to get a piece of lint or a piece of thread and you won't have any tension. But assuming that that's all not there and everything's loaded properly, the next thing is to adjust how much pull there is on that. And there's always a screw on a bobbin case, and different bobbin cases look different, but the screw is always there, and it always adjusts how much tension there is on the thread. Tension can be really loose. It can be really tight, but it has to be equal top and bottom to get a good looking stitch. And that's pretty much how the two tensions balance each other. The last significant part of the sewing equation, as we are dealing with it on this machine, is the feed system of the machine. And like everything else about a sewing machine, it's engineered to happen at a certain point and only at that point. And to demonstrate what I'm referring to here, we'll take a piece of fabric and put it under the foot. And what I want you to notice, I'm going to turn by hand so we go slow. How's that? The needle's up, the fabric's moving. And then just before the needle gets to the fabric stops moving and doesn't move until the needle's fully out and we're off again. Now, the reason that's significant is because sometimes you try to put too much fabric through the feed system, or it's a particular kind of fabric that's slippery or whatever, and we get a little bit of this kind of motion where the hands get in and start helping. Now, to some extent, that's unavoidable on some fabrics, but this is what you have to understand. If you push on the fabric while the needle's in, you will be causing that needle to flex. And when that needle flexes, it's going to come down in places where it was not engineered to come down. And in short, what happens is you've got 2 or 3 high-speed pieces of steel that are going to be in the same place at the same time at a high rate of speed. Something will give. The thing that you most normally experience when that happens is the needle breaks. So you take the needle out, put a new needle in, and you're off, you think you're finished. Well, whatever broke that needle is going to be showing some scarring or scoring, and that often adds up to thread getting caught in those areas at certain times, erratically, creating what looks like a tension problem. So there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind when you're helping fabric feed. If you slow down and consciously only push on that fabric while the needle's up, you'll have less trouble with the needle coming down and hitting things. And what the needle can hit down below is beginning with the presser foot. After that, it can run into the plate. I'll snip this so we can get a good look at the plate. The plate has a hole where the needle goes through. If that becomes scored because the needle hit it so many times, thread will get caught on that. After that, we go down below the bed of the machine where we have the hook. And likewise, when the needle hits the plate, it can also miss the plate and hit the hook. Again, keep in mind that a hook has a very sharp point, and that point comes behind the needle routinely, and that's how it catches the thread. If the needle's in the way of the hook will hit the needle, break the needle, do damage to the hook, then not release thread when it's supposed to. And this particular machine, when the hook point reaches about this point, about a 5 o'clock position, the thread is released. If you have a bird hook where the needle hit the hook and damaged the tip of it, it may not release till it gets to the 4 o'clock position, which will affect the look of your tension. So you see, oftentimes when you have tension problems on a machine, it's not just the tension dial, it's not just the bobbin case tension, it's other things that interrupt the normal flow of thread. And if that is the experience that you're having, no amount of adjusting the tension, top or bottom, is going to change it. So to reiterate, when we get to the end of it all, we need to make sure that our top thread is properly loaded on the machine. We need to make sure that our bottom thread is properly loaded into the bobbin case. And then we need to make sure that we don't have damage to what we refer to as thread passing parts, which again would be the foot, the plate, the hook, the feed dogs. Oh, and lest I forget, the needle. The needle needs to be sharp, or it needs to be properly, cleanly entering the fabric without bringing damage into the fabric and tearing it. All those things will create tension issues, and those are all things that you can check before you get on the phone and tell me that you need to have a tension adjustment. I hope you've enjoyed this little segment and look forward to seeing you in the future. Happy sewing.